Envision a crisp morning stroll with your pet, only to encounter the unimaginable. The scene is set in Albuquerque, New Mexico, during February 2009. A resident, Christine Ross, like many others, is out for a routine walk with her pet. However, this regular day takes a grim turn when she notices something unusual: a bone. But this isn't just any bone. It's a human femur, lying there stark and bare, a shocking testament of mortality interrupting the peaceful morning. This eerie discovery triggers a sequence of events beyond anyone's anticipation. The police arrive, and a solitary bone soon morphs into a morbid dig site. The earth hides a truth as sequentially, the skeletal remains of 11 women and an unborn child are dug up from makeshift graves. Each revelation is a testament to abruptly ended lives, their tales buried deep in Albuquerque's soil. Most victims, primarily Hispanic women, had links to drugs and prostitution, leading lives scarred by struggle and hardship. Among them, Jamie Barella stood out with no such connections, making her presence among the dead all the more puzzling. The gruesome find sends shockwaves through the community as a gloomy cloud hangs over Albuquerque. City scrambles to make sense of a horrific truth. A serial killer, possibly the West Mesa Bone Collector, had been active among them, the victims vanishing between 2001 and 2005. The terrifying sketches a chilling image, the enormity of the crime leaving both law enforcement and the residents in shock. The tranquil strolls are forever tainted, replaced by a harrowing reminder of the horrors that occurred. What started as an ordinary day morphed into a chilling morning that will etch itself into Albuquerque's memory forever. 11 women, each with their unique narratives and lives, unceremoniously interred in the desert. These women, mostly of Hispanic heritage, were ensnared by harsh realities that led them into a life of substance abuse and sex work. They wore different hats: daughters, mothers, sisters, friends. However, to the predator who stalked them, they were simply game. They vanished individually between 2001 and 2005, leaving behind a maze of unexplained questions and grief-stricken families. Among these women was Monica Candelaria, who disappeared without leaving any clues in 2003, and Veronica Romero, who was reported missing just a year later in 2004. Their narratives, much like the others, bore similarities, marked with adversity and struggle, but highlighted with episodes of resilience and optimism. Then there's Jamie Barella. Her story was an anomaly. Being only 15, she had no known connections to drugs or sex work, a schoolgirl brimming with dreams and potential. Her disappearance in 2004 sent ripples of shock and fear throughout the community, a stark reminder of widespread danger. These women, hailing from different backgrounds, ended up in the same grim situation, falling prey to an unidentified stalker. These women who laughed, wept, loved, and aspired were reduced to skeletal remains, their identities established only through thorough forensic probes. Unearthing of their remains in 2009 was a morose disclosure that provided closure to some families, but ripped open wounds for many others. Their lives, once pulsating with possibilities, had been cruelly snuffed out. The desert, once a symbol of unspoiled charm, had turned into their ultimate place of rest, a mute spectator to their untold narratives. All these women met the same tragic fate. Their lives abruptly ended, their stories interred with them. With a conundrum this profound, the quest for justice was bound to be arduous. And yet the steadfast members of the 118th Street Task Force stand vigilant, poised to unravel the intricacies of this unresolved puzzle. From the get-go, the task force embarked on a daunting journey. The victims had vanished for years, their existence claimed by a ruthless predator that left only skeletal remnants as evidence. However, the investigators were resolute. They meticulously reconstructed the victims' identities, a task that was as thorough as it was emotionally distressing. They sifted through over 1,400 leads, each one a potential breakthrough that could lead them closer to revealing the culprit. They undertook 7 comprehensive land searches, in the hope of unearthing that one decisive piece of evidence that would blow the case wide open. Still, despite their unwavering efforts, the identity of the West Mesa Bone Collector remains shrouded in mystery. Many suspects were scrutinized over the years. Fred Reynolds, a notorious pimp with photos of some of the victims. Lorenzo Montoya, a man known for his violent tendencies towards women who resided near the burial site. Ron Irwin, an amateur photographer with an unsettling interest in the area. And Joseph Blee, a man with a track record of assaulting sex workers. Still, none of these suspects could be conclusively associated with the crimes. Despite the escalating suspicions and the exhaustive investigations, there were no arrests made. The West Mesa Bone Collector, regardless of their identity, managed to evade capture. As we stand here today, 15 years after the macabre discovery of the remains, the case remains a mystery. The Albuquerque Police Department perseveres in its relentless search for truth and justice, unwavering in its determination to solve this enigmatic case. But as time continues to pass, one stark reality remains eerily evident. Despite the investigators' indefatigable efforts, the West Mesa Bone Collector remains at large. 15 years have elapsed, yet the West Mesa murders remain a festering sore in Albuquerque's heart. A stark reminder of the fragility of life and the lurking darkness. Despite exhaustive investigations, repeated land searches, and an overwhelming number of tips, the case continues to be cloaked in mystery. The Albuquerque Police Department, unyielding in their pursuit for truth, continues to seek crucial information. The intricate and complex nature of this case has only bolstered their determination. The crime scene, a desolate landscape once hid the remains of 11 women and an unborn child, has been methodically sifted through over and over again. A sign of the relentless efforts of those yearning for justice. Chief Harold Medina, a symbol of firm resolve amidst the nebulousness, has asserted an unswerving dedication to crack the case. His promise mirrors the collective desire for closure, a desire that hangs heavy in the air of Albuquerque. The quest for justice is not a dash, but a marathon, a trial of stamina and strong will. Even after 15 years since the uncovering of the remains, the tenacity to bring the culprit to justice remains undeterred. 8 women linked to this case are still unaccounted for, their destinies unresolved, each one an enigma in this extensive, convoluted mystery. It's a haunting thought that the crucial evidence to demystify this enigma could still be out there, ready to be unearthed. The lack of a resolution does not indicate defeat. On the contrary, it signifies that the pursuit of truth is an unrelenting mission, one that does not succumb to the passage of time. The narrative of the West Mesa murders is far from culminating. It's a story that keeps unfolding, its final installments yet to be penned. The quest for justice has not ceased. The narrative of the West Mesa murders still persists. As we probe further into the darkness, we hold on to a beacon of hope, a reflection of our unwavering faith that one day, the truth will emerge. In the face of such a chilling enigma, every shred of information is crucial. It's a riddle, a maze filled with secrets and shadows where every hint, no matter how small, could be the pivotal piece that draws us nearer to the truth. West Mesa murders have left an indelible mark on Albuquerque, a scar that defiantly lingers while justice remains out of reach. But it's not only about uncovering the offender, it's about honoring those women and the unborn child whose futures were cruelly stolen away. However, this isn't a story that's been left in the past. It's an active, ongoing investigation, a pursuit of justice that's very much alive today. The Albuquerque Police Department continues to offer a standing reward for anyone who can provide information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. So, if you hold any information, no matter how insignificant it may seem, it's your time to rise. Your voice is important. Your knowledge could be the beacon that exposes the hidden aspects of this case, the spark that lights the way to justice. So don't hold back. Don't let uncertainty or fear silence you. Forward, share what you possess. Remember, your information could be the key that finally solves this long-standing enigma. Help bring justice to these women and closure to Albuquerque. Picture a serene, tranquil night by Lake Bodom, shattered by the terrifying echoes of a crime that would perplex Finland and the world for years to come. On the 5th of June 1960, a seemingly innocent camping adventure took a horrifying turn. The tranquility of the lake was disrupted as 3 unsuspecting adolescents became the of a savage assault. Amidst the serene wilderness, a terrifying scene unfolded as a brutal assailant descended upon the unsuspecting campers. The chilling fact that adds to the intrigue is that only one person, Niels Gustafsson, survived the encounter. Dawn broke. The terror of what occurred under the veil of night was unveiled, marking the inception of a mystery that persists to this day. As detectives descended upon the scene, they were confronted with a myriad of unanswered questions. With 3 teenagers violently taken away and 1 survivor, Niels Gustafsson, the inquiry was an intricate web from the onset. The crime scene, a once tranquil camping spot by Bodom Lake, was now marred with a horrifying narrative of brutality. The initial phases of the inquiry were laden with ambiguity. The of definitive evidence made it a daunting task to reconstruct the occurrences of that ominous June night in 1960. The detectives were faced with a complex puzzle to solve, but the resultant image was anything but transparent. Amid this turmoil, suspicion ominously hovered over the sole survivor, Gustafsson. However, the evidence against him was inconclusive at best. Having lived through a night of terror, Gustafsson found himself under intense scrutiny by those endeavoring to unravel the enigma of his friend's untimely end. As the investigation expanded, other potential culprits emerged, each with their unique quirks. Carl Valdemar Gillstrom, dubbed the Kiosk Man, was a local with a known animosity towards campers. His unstable conduct and purported threats against campers portrayed him as a possible suspect. But in the absence of definitive proof linking him to the heinous act, he remained an elusive figure in this spine-chilling tale. In the midst was Hans Assmann, a man with a dark history and alleged links to the KGB. His questionable behavior post the murders and his closeness to the crime scene brought him into the detectives' focus. However, yet again, the absence of solid evidence led the detectives into a blind alley. Ultimately, the detectives were left grappling with a conundrum that seemed insurmountable, a puzzle where the pieces simply wouldn't align. The Lake Bodom murders stayed unresolved, with a string of suspects but no evident perpetrator, a tale that continues to baffle and spook even decades after. In the throes of the investigation, an unforeseen revelation added another dimension to the mystery. Enter Pentti Soininen, a character as complicated as the case itself. Known for his violent tendencies, Soininen's startling confession to the Lake Bodom murders took everyone aback. I know what you're thinking. Case solved, isn't it? However, not so fast. There was a significant stumbling block. Soininen was considered too green at the time of the murders. Imagine this: a young lad, hardly past his boyhood, confessing to a crime of such a grand scale. It was a conundrum that didn't align well, a puzzle piece which seemed misplaced. Despite his confession, the law enforcement remained dubious. Was it plausible for a boy just out of his teens executing such a dreadful act? This doubt led the sleuths to disregard Soininen's confession, leaving the case unresolved yet again. But Soininen's confession had a profound impact. It stirred the cauldron of an already simmering mystery, triggering debates and fostering a plethora of conspiracy theories. This peculiar confession stoked the flames of speculation and conspiracy theories. Nearly 50 years later, the case experienced a shocking development. In 2005, 45 years after the Lake Bodom murders, the pendulum of justice swung once again. The only survivor of that horrific night, Niels Gustafsson, was thrust into the legal limelight. The Finnish courts indicted Gustafsson for the murder of his 3 companions, adding an icy twist to an already cold story. Gustafsson's trial became a spectacle that captivated the nation. The prosecution suggested that Gustafsson, driven by a blend of jealousy and anger, had turned on his friends on that tragic night. The defense painted a contrasting picture, asserting that Gustafsson was a victim, not a perpetrator, a man who had endured a terrifying attack, only to find himself accused of it decades later. The trial turned into a battlefield of narratives, sparking high drama and profound uncertainty. The evidence was meticulously examined, the testimonies intricately analyzed, but the case against Gustafsson was anything but definitive. There was no irrefutable proof, no conclusive evidence. Even motive, a key element in any murder trial, was conspicuously missing. The verdict, once delivered, sent tremors through the courtroom. Gustafsson was exonerated. The court deemed the evidence inconclusive and the motive insufficient. The public reaction was a cocktail of astonishment, relief, and disappointment. Many had anticipated, even desired, a different outcome, but the law had spoken, and Gustafsson walked free. The trial concluded, but the questions and theories enveloping the Lake Bodom murders persisted, casting a lingering shadow over the case. Gustafsson's exoneration did minimal to suppress the speculation and conspiracy theories that had been circling the case for decades. The Lake Bodom murders, it appeared, would continue to spook the collective psyche of Finland, a chilling reminder of a mystery that remained unsolved. With the mystery unresolved, theories and speculations began to occupy the void left by the absence of answers. The passage of time saw the Lake Bodom murders becoming a hotbed for conjectures and hypotheses. In the want for a definite conclusion, the human mind began its dance of speculation. Theories swirled Niels Gustafsson, the only one to have survived that fateful night. Could it have been him, acting out of fury or under influence? Lacking concrete evidence and motive, this theory often loses its ground. Then there were whispers about Carl Valdemar Gillstrom, a man whose abhorrence for campers was well known. Could his loathing have provoked him into committing such a monstrous act? Or the case of Hans Assmann, who turned up at a hospital with suspicious injuries around the time of the murders. Yet again, the lack of proof pushes these theories into the whirlpool of speculation. Then we have the supernatural enthusiasts adding their own twist to the narrative, suggesting the Lake Bodom murders were not the work of a human at all. Was it a creature of the night, maybe? Or a spiteful spirit? While these theories may seem intriguing, they are usually dismissed as mere imaginative stories. The confession of Pentti Soininen too started a wave of theories. Despite his evident violent streak, his tender age at the time of the murders makes his confession appear doubtful. Nevertheless, some still cling on to the possibility of his involvement. Then there are those who see a conspiracy. Was it a cover-up? Was a larger scheme in motion? With no solid proof, these theories too remain hovering in the realm of speculation. Despite the passage of time, the Lake Bodom murders continue to intrigue and baffle, serving as a chilling reminder of a crime that refuses to fade into oblivion. More than 6 decades later, the Lake Bodom murders persist as one of Finland's most notorious unsolved crimes. The reverberations of this dreadful incident continue to be felt in the serene town of Espoo, serving as a daunting reminder of the horror that once unfolded on peaceful shores. The enigma, as profound and obscure as the lake itself, continues to fascinate, bewilder, and horrify equal measure. The case has evolved into a darkly captivating puzzle that continues to engage true crime aficionados worldwide. Puzzle pieces that obstinately resist fitting together, theories that multiply, suspects that appear and disappear, yet the truth of that ominous June night in 1960 remains as elusive as ever. The Lake Bodom murders have left a profound impact not just on the community of Espoo, but on the collective consciousness of a nation. It's a chilling tale that continues to intrigue, confound, and haunt. Looking back on this chilling crime, we're faced with a disturbing question. Will the enigma of Lake Bodom ever be unraveled?
Imagine this. The year is 1971, Washington, D.C. A series of appalling crimes begin that will plunge the city into a perpetual state of terror. Welcome to the eerie tale of the Freeway Phantom. An unidentified assailant, this phantom spread terror throughout the city from April 1971 to September 1972. The victims, 6 young black girls and women, their lives abruptly ended in the most savage way imaginable. Abducted, assaulted, and strangled, their bodies dumped in various locations, mimicking discarded pieces of a grim puzzle. The efforts of law enforcement, the trail ran cold. The phantom, it seemed, had vanished as swiftly as he had arrived, leaving behind a city gripped by terror and families forever marked by loss. The case, despite extensive investigations, remains unsolved, turning the phantom into an enduring mystery. This is the haunting tale of the Freeway Phantom. Our narrative commences in April 1971. The nation's capital, Washington, D.C., was on the brink of a horrifying sequence of murders orchestrated by the Freeway Phantom. This villainous figure began his spine-chilling spree that marked the city's history. His first victim was an innocent 10-year-old girl, taken under inexplicable circumstances and her existence tragically shortened. The girl's lifeless body was discovered, reflecting the Phantom's savage ways. The city was in shock, but the nightmare was only starting. A few months later, in July, the Phantom took another, an 11-year-old girl. The specifics of her abduction remain as cryptic as the killer himself. Her body was found in a condition parallel to the first victim, a sinister duplicate of the Phantom's brutal signature. The Phantom's reign of horror continued as the summer progressed. August witnessed another life taken, this time a 14-year-old girl. The unnerving similarity of her abduction to the previous victims set a terrifying pattern, instilling fear within the community. The Phantom's horrifying trail didn't end there. In November, a 17-year-old girl was his next target. The specifics of her abduction and murder closely mirrored the preceding crimes, reinforcing the Phantom's dreadful modus operandi. The dawn of 1972, no relief. In March, the Phantom struck once again, claiming the life of an 18-year-old woman. The recurring dreadful pattern of abduction and murder left the city in a state of dread. Then, in September 1972, the Phantom claimed his last victim. This time, a 12-year-old girl was at the mercy of his ruthless whims. Adding a horrifying twist, the Phantom manipulated this victim into making a phone call prior to her murder, adding a chilling layer to his already gruesome actions. During his reign of horror, the Phantom left notes taunting the authorities and escalating public fear. Each note, each victim, each discarded body made a trail of terror that the city would remember for a long time. By September 1972, 6 had been horrifically taken, and the Freeway Phantom disappeared as abruptly as he had materialized. The trail of bodies ended as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a haunting enigma that continues to perplex Washington, D.C. to this day. The city was in an uproar, clamoring for justice for these young lives snatched away prematurely. The heinous crimes had left an indelible mark on the community, leading to an immediate manhunt for the so-called Freeway Phantom, involving multiple law enforcement agencies. As the investigation unraveled, it turned into a maze of leads, dead ends, and possible suspects. Despite the countless hours dedicated to examining the evidence, the case was still enshrouded in mystery, with the killer's identity as elusive as a phantom. As the days shifted into weeks and weeks into months, a disconcerting narrative became apparent. There was a mounting feeling within the black community that the intensity of the investigation was diminishing. The victims, all young black girls, had been brutally ripped away from their families, causing an immense public sorrow. There was a perceived disinterest from law enforcement, exacerbating the community's wounds. The aggravation and rage were tangible. The community felt ignored, their pleas for justice reverberating in emptiness. It was not solely about resolving a crime, it was about recognizing the worth of the lives lost and acknowledging that every life matters, irrespective of color or socio-economic status. The stagnant investigation intensified these sentiments, shedding light on the deep-seated issues of racism and inequality rampant in society. As years drifted by, the initial zeal of the investigation diminished. The faces, the victims, once a stark reminder of the case's urgency, gradually faded into oblivion. The city moved forward, but the victims' families were left with a lingering pain, a stark reminder of the justice that remained elusive. Despite relentless efforts, the case cold. The Freeway Phantom remained a faceless terror. The eerie legacy of the Freeway Phantom persisted, casting a somber shadow over the city, a chilling reminder of a time when terror roamed the freeways and justice was just out of grasp. More than 50 years have elapsed since the last atrocity credited to the Freeway Phantom. Persisting imprint of the Phantom's deeds reverberates within the confines of Southeast DC, an unending symphony of distress and agitation yet to reach its note. The victim's kin, enduring a void that can never be replenished, have spent long decades wrestling with the dreadful uncertainty. The loss of a loved one is shattering enough, but the brutal termination of their lives, their innocence tarnished, and the culprit still free, is a laceration that time has a hard time mending. This sequence of homicides didn't just target individuals, it assaulted an entire community. The Phantom's deeds amplified the existing division between law enforcement and the black neighborhoods of DC. This distrust, intensified by seeming apathy and a lack of haste in solving the crimes, has left wounds still visible today. However, let's not overlook that no matter how deep the darkness, it can't overshadow the light. Amid the anguish and the exasperation, a ray of hope has surfaced. A new generation of committed individuals, fortified with persistence and the unyielding pursuit of justice, are revisiting old files, brushing off neglected evidence, and rekindling the quest to unmask the Freeway Phantom. Ex-detective Romaine Jenkins and public radio correspondent Celeste Headley are among these determined spirits, their voices reverberating through the airwaves, illuminating this cold case anew. Their investigative podcast has revived the tale, stirring the communal consciousness and rekindling the spark of hope for justice. These actions underline an emotional truth, that the legacy of the Freeway Phantom is not solely one of violence and terror. Also a story of resilience, a tribute to the everlasting spirit of a community that refuses to let their lost daughters be forgotten. The Freeway Phantom, a chilling reminder of a city's darkest hours, remains an unsolved riddle to this day. But as long as there are those who refuse to let the story perish, the Phantom's legacy will not just be one of horror, but also of hope, resilience, and the unswerving pursuit of justice.
Dawn of an April morning in 1981, a horrifying tableau was unveiled in the peaceful resort town of Keddie, California. It was an uncommon morning for Sheila Sharp. The typical humming of birds was substituted by a menacing silence, a silence that would soon expose a terrifying discovery. As she entered her family's cabin, number 28 in the Keddie Resort, she found herself amidst a horrifying spectacle. The serene mountain haven had metamorphosed overnight into a scene resembling a horror movie. Her mother, Glenna Susan Sharp, Her brother John Sharp and John's friend Dana Wingate were motionless. The savage nature of the crime was clear. The victims had been restrained, beaten, and stabbed, a terrifying tribute to the violent frenzy that had occurred in the cabin. The local authorities were called forthwith. As they reached the site, they were presented with the same horrific sight that had greeted Sheila earlier that day. The tranquil serenity of the resort was disrupted by the grim truth of the horrifying crime scene. The unnerving silence of the cabin was a stark contrast to the turmoil that must have taken place during the night. But amidst all the disorder, there was one glaring void. Tina, Sheila's younger sister, was absent. The family, already shocked by the brutal scene, was now confronted with another horrifying reality. Tina was missing. The hunt for her started immediately, adding another level of urgency to an already panicked situation. As the law enforcement officers commenced their preliminary investigation, they couldn't help but ponder, what could have provoked such a brutal end in such a peaceful environment? Who would perpetrate such a monstrous act, and for what reason? And most critically, where was Tina Sharp? What had started as a serene weekend in the mountains had morphed into a nightmarish crime scene, with the youngest member of the family missing. As dawn broke over Keddie, law enforcement embarked on their grim task of probing the horrific murders. The sight met them was one of savage brutality, a chilling tableau that bore the marks of terrible violence. The victims had been restrained, bludgeoned, and stabbed, a callous extinguishing of 4 innocent lives. The detectives, seasoned and hardened, were left deeply unsettled by the savagery displayed at the crime scene. Their first challenge in the investigation was the absence of a discernible motive. Nothing seemed to explain why this family in this particular cabin had been singled out. The Sharps family were popular figures in the community, with no known adversaries. There was no evidence of theft, no hint of a personal feud. This vacuum of motive broadened the scope of potential suspects. As the probe progressed, they questioned hundreds of individuals, charting a course through a maze of dead ends. Among the persons of interest were the Sharps' neighbors, including Martin Smart and John Beau Boudeb. Both men were subjected to extensive interrogation, but no concrete evidence could be found to connect them to the crime. Undeterred by the sheer brutality of the crime, the investigators remained steadfast in their pursuit of justice for the victims. They pursued every lead, regardless of its perceived significance. Each piece of evidence was scrutinized meticulously, every potential suspect subjected to thorough investigation. However, as weeks turned into months, then years, the leads began to evaporate. Despite their relentless efforts, the case turned cold, leaving the Keddie murders enshrouded in enigma. 3 years on, the case took a bone-chilling twist. A discovery, Tina's remains, sent shockwaves through the community of Keddie. Far off in Butte County, the confirmation of the youngest of the Sharp family's cruel fate was more than just a missing persons case. The town was shaken to its core, the once vibrant resort town, now a ghost town, a chilling reminder of a brutal quadruple murder. Laughter and joy had given way to hushed whispers and fearful glances. With the finding of Tina's remains, the investigation intensity heightened. The gruesome testament to the crime's brutality brought forth leads, but paradoxically deepened the mystery as well. The haunting question remained, who could be capable of such a monstrous act? The community was desperate for answers, for closure, for justice. With the unearthing of Tina's remains, the case escalated to a quadruple homicide, yet the perpetrator remained elusive. In 2013, over 3 decades post the murders, the case was revived. The frozen case of the Keddie Murders, a horrifying multiple homicide that had left an everlasting wound on the small town of Keddie, California, was brought back to life and put into the care of committed detectives. This wasn't just a mere act of file reorganization. Rather, this was a rejuvenated commitment to justice, a vow to the victims and their loved ones that their lives held value, and their tragic demise would not fade into oblivion. With the case revived, fresh leads were fervently followed. The investigators ventured into the labyrinth of evidence, reassessing old leads and discovering new ones. The examination was not just limited to the horrific details of the crime, but also the circumstances that surrounded it. The initial investigation was clouded with doubts, rumors of a potential cover-up that had let the murderer or murderers slip away from hands of justice. The case's revival also highlighted the sinister past of the Keddie Resort and its infamous Cabin 28. This wasn't merely a crime scene, but a symbol of the heinous crime that had happened within its confines. In 2004, the cabin was brought down, an effort to erase the tangible reminders of the terror that had unfolded. But the memories weren't so simply wiped out. The destruction of the cabin was a poignant moment, a physical closure to a chapter of the story. But the enigma persisted, the phantoms of the victims still crying out for justice. As the investigators went deeper, they uncovered a complicated net of intrigue and potential misdirection. The suspects, including the mysterious neighbors Martin Smart and John Bo Bubaid, were re-evaluated, their histories analyzed under the harsh illumination of new evidence and contemporary investigative methods. The revival of the case sparked new hope for justice, but the Keddie murders persist as one of California's most infamous unsolved crimes. The tale of the Keddie murders is a chilling reminder that even in the most peaceful of places, wickedness can strike with shocking intensity. But even in the midst of such darkness, the chase for justice goes on, a shining beacon of hope in the abyss of tragedy. Presently, the Keddie murders continue to fascinate true crime aficionados globally. The eerie narrative of the fourfold homicide that transpired in the spring of 1981 in the tranquil town of Keddie, California, generates an aftertaste of enigma and fascination. The victims, Glenna Susan Sharp, her offspring, Tina and John, and John's comrade, Dana Wingate, endured a gruesome demise, their existence cruelly terminated in what was once their sanctuary, house number 28 of the Keddie Resort. The lasting charm of this case is entrenched in its puzzling elements. Despite countless leads, suspects, and an unyielding investigation, the truth remains veiled in obscurity. The horrifying details of the murders, the victims tied up, stabbed, strangled, and bludgeoned, in conjunction with the perplexing disappearance and subsequent discovery of Tina's remains, keep fanning the flames of conjecture and hypothesis. The profound shock of the murders on the Keddie community has been considerable. The once thriving resort area witnessed a downslide post the incident, with the unresolved crime casting a lingering, ominous cloud over the scenic expanse. However, the memory of the victims and the longing for justice remain undiminished. The house might have been razed in 2004, but the reverberations of the past still ring out, a chilling memento of the unresolved enigma. Suspects, neighbor Martin Smart and John Bo Budebi, have appeared and disappeared, their association a topic of fervent dispute. The botched handling of the case by authorities, inklings of a cover-up, and the reopening of the case in 2013 contribute further complexity to the elaborate conundrum. While the Keddie murders remain a mystery, the relentless search for answers persists, keeping the memory of the victims alive in the pursuit of justice. At the dawn of the 20th century, a chilling specter loomed over the dynamic city of New Orleans, an unseeable horror, recognized only as the Axeman. This anonymous menace imposed a reign of dread from May 1918 to October 1919, casting an eerie and unsettling specter the metropolis. His victims were chiefly Italian immigrants, industrious individuals who had called this city their home. Axeman was no mundane criminal. His assaults were savage and petrifying, executed with an axe or a straight razor. The victims were not simply arbitrary targets, they were predominantly grocers and their relatives, residing in cohesive Italian neighborhoods. He would infiltrate their homes in the dead of night, leaving behind scenes of unthinkable horror. Yet the most peculiar was the lack of an apparent motive for these ghastly assaults. The Axeman wasn't plundering his victims. It appeared he was propelled by something far more wicked, a lust for blood and dread that held the city in a state panic. Law enforcement was overwhelmed with reports of dubious activity, and denizens armed themselves, living in perpetual dread of the ensuing assault. The Italian immigrant community, despite their financial triumph in the grocery businesses, were particularly impacted. They lived in an environment of terror and mistrust, aware they could be the Axeman's subsequent prey. And then, as abruptly as they had commenced the assaults, the specter receded, but the dread. As swiftly as the Axeman had initiated his reign of dread, he vanished, leaving behind only a path of blood and unresolved queries. The initial onslaught transpired in May 1918. An unsuspecting grocer and his family found themselves the first unfortunate victims of the Axeman. This malefactor, favoring an axe or straight razor as his weapon of choice, focused particularly on the city's Italian immigrants or Italian Americans, with grocers and their families being his primary targets. His reign of dread extended from spring of 1918 to autumn 1919, with each onslaught escalating in sheer brutality. The Axeman's method of operation was consistent, yet terrifyingly straightforward. He would infiltrate his victims' residences during the eerie silence of the night, brandishing an axe or straight razor with deadly accuracy. His victims were left horrifically disfigured or lifeless, their homes morphing into horrific crime scenes. The most unsettling part? None of these onslaughts were incited by greed. The Axeman was not interested in earthly belongings. His sole purpose was to induce terror and disarray. As the onslaughts persisted, a tangible wave of terror enveloped the city. New Orleans, once celebrated for its lively jazz and energetic street life, was now under the specter of an unidentified threat. Residents lived in perpetual anxiety, with every groan of the floorboards or whisper of the wind triggering a chill down their spines. Grocers and their families were particularly panic-stricken, aware that they were the preferred of this faceless terror. Law enforcement was besieged with reports of dubious activity, but despite their tireless efforts, the Axeman remained elusive. He seemed to dissolve into thin air after each onslaught, leaving behind nothing but the gruesome vestiges of his crimes. Then, as suddenly as they began, the onslaught stopped in October 1919. The Axeman's reign of terror had ended, but his influence was far from expunged. The city exhaled a communal sigh of relief, yet the terror lurked. The Axeman had disappeared, but the enigma of his identity persisted, casting a lengthy, ominous shadow over New Orleans. The onslaughts abruptly stopped in October 1919, but the terror and the enigma endured. In the aftermath of the final onslaught, two individuals, Orlando and Frank Giordano, found themselves caught in the clutches of the law. In a maelstrom of allegations and terror, these two were unjustly declared guilty, their existences permanently scarred by the Axeman's reign of malevolence. The proof against the Giordano men was far from irrefutable. It was a rushed assemblage of questionable eyewitness testimonies and circumstantial indicators. The trial was less about solid facts and more about fueling the city's hysteria and intense desire for resolution. The villain required a face, and the Giordandos, regrettably, fit the role. Let's probe further into the case against the Giordano men. The primary witness for the prosecution was the surviving victim of the Axeman's ultimate assault. Despite her initial incompetence to identify her assailants, she later gestured uncertainly towards the Giordandos, a choice steeped in uncertainty and skepticism. The additional proof? A blood-stained razor discovered at the crime scene, but with no obvious correlation to the defendants. The city, amidst its fear and desperation, neglected these glaring lacunae in the case. The Giordandos were Italian immigrants, members of a community that, in spite of their economic prosperity, endured bias and xenophobia. The Italians were the outsiders, the effortless scapegoats in the face of an unfathomable horror. This partiality played a decisive part in the mishandling of the case, resulting in the sentence of two blameless individuals. The trial was rapid and ruthless. The city exhaled a sigh of relief, persuaded they had apprehended their monster. But the authentic monster, the Axeman, remained undisturbed, his identity veiled in obscurity. The Giordano men served their sentence, their existence irrevocably transformed by a transgression they did not perpetrate. Their narrative is a harsh warning of the peril of prejudice and the significance of comprehensive, impartial inquiries. Despite their innocence, the Giordano men bore the brunt for the Axeman's atrocities. Their story is a haunting segment in the narrative of the Axeman, a yarn of unjust sentences and a city's frantic pursuit for justice. In the third month of 1919, a bone-chilling missive was delivered to the newspaper establishment. The correspondence claiming to have been written by the elusive Axeman himself. This was no ordinary piece of written communication. It was a taunt, a challenge, an ominous oath sent shivers down the spine of an already anxious city. The Axeman, in his warped display of audacity, had taken to script. He drafted a sinister manifesto detailing his intentions and motives, proclaiming to be a demon from the underworld, a superior entity who had descended upon New Orleans to claim lives. Yet, here's where the story takes a strange twist. The Axeman in his missive made an eccentric vow. He alleged that on a predetermined evening, he would again roam the streets of New Orleans, but he would show mercy to those whose homes reverberated with the sound of jazz music. Jazz, it appeared, was the Axeman's sole weakness. It may hint at a testament about the potency of music to pacify even the cruelest of beasts. But let's not deviate. The public response to this missive was a melange of fear, skepticism, and morbid fascination. The city was consumed by a unique kind of dread, a dread accentuated by the mesmerizing rhythm of jazz. As it turns out, people took the Axeman's caution to heart. On the agreed evening, New Orleans morphed into a citywide musical celebration. Residences, pubs, and street corners everywhere echoed with the vibrancy of jazz. It was as if the entire metropolis had chosen to dance with the devil, hoping the melody would keep thee at bay. And then, the evening came to pass. The morning light shone over a city that had spent the evening in a symphony of defiance. However, as the music dwindled and life stumbled back into its mundane rhythm, one element was left unchanged. The Axeman, the faceless horror who had kept the city under a grip of terror for a year, remained an unsolved puzzle. The man responsible for the heinous acts, the author of the taunting missive, kept lurking in the shadows. The evening came and passed, and the city reverberated with jazz, but the Axeman puzzle remained unsolved. A full century has elapsed since the Axeman haunted the alleyways of New Orleans. Still, his echo persists. The persona of the A-Wraith who once held a metropolis in his terrifying grasp continues to be veiled in conundrum. Was he a man unraveled by some ominous fixation? A crazed slayer who delighted in the dread he sowed in his prey? Or was he, as some propose, an apparition, a product of shared hysteria that engulfed the city? A multitude of theories have been proposed over the years, each trying to decipher the puzzle that is the Axeman. One such hypothesis revolves around Frank Doc Mumphrey. This man, an acknowledged offender, was present in New Orleans during the time of the assaults and had a past marked by aggression. His name has been tossed around in muted tones, with many suspecting him to be the Axeman. Yet, even with these doubts, no conclusive evidence has ever linked him to the incidents. The Axeman, whoever he was, seemed to disappear as suddenly as he emerged, leaving a legacy of terror and a city indelibly marked by his reign of fear. The incident, much like the man, remains unresolved, a neglected dossier, gathering cobwebs on some overlooked shelf. Ultimately, the Axeman New Orleans is more than a mere serial murderer. He embodies the darkest aspects of human nature, a stark token of the malevolence that can hide in the corners of our world. His narrative is a harrowing account of violence and conundrum, an epic that has become woven into the fabric of New Orleans. As we probe the annals of history, striving to untangle this lasting puzzle, we find ourselves with more queries than solutions. And perhaps that is the most unsettling element. For in the void of truth, the imagination is let loose to invent its own fiends. The Axeman of New Orleans, a forever inscribed in the chronicles of true crime, a conundrum entwined in a paradox. His persona remains as elusive as the jazz melodies that once pervaded the New Orleans nights, in a fruitless attempt to deter his fatal acts.